Welcome back into the B-Sides of Sports. This is our Season 3, Episode 8. And we're going to dive right into a loaded NFL slate. This is Week 13 of the NFL, and we had a lot of good games today. Drake and I are going to start off with the Chiefs visiting the Packers this week. A really, really good game with a lot of controversy in that last 2 minutes. Drake, where do you want to start with this one?
I just think my main note is I think it's unfortunate that we probably are just going to be talking about the calls at the end of the game because really the Packers just played better football for most of this game, but all we're going to hear about is officiating, which is kind of funny because usually it's vice versa with the Chiefs. Usually it's the other way around, but in my opinion, I think the officiating was at the end of the day kind of what I expect from a Chiefs game where they do get penalties. Namely, I think the biggest one for me was the Mahomes unnecessary roughness. It's the end of the game.
Roughness.
He's going for the play. He's going for the first down there. So the refs, I think, just have to take all that into consideration. He wasn't out of bounds. Gene Steratore said it was a penalty. And then the next play, there's a really bad missed PI. To me, that's a makeup call. I don't like the idea of a makeup call. It's just unfortunately how this business works. And no one will tell me otherwise that it wasn't because they knew that call on Mahomes wasn't great. It shouldn't have been a penalty. It's kind of one of those Mahomes calls, right? That a lot of people have coined, it's the Cowboys get those calls. Tom Brady got those calls. It's just kind of the nature of the business. They're going to protect the players who make them a lot of money. But I just think, again, the Chiefs, I don't even think played a bad game necessarily, but to me, the Packers were just the better team. So instead of talking about the controversy, I just think what I would love to focus on is the game itself, because this really was a great game through and through. Lambeau night, Sunday night football, I've always said to me is the most magical night for football. It's always my favorite games right before the week starts. It's the end of the week, the nightcap. I love Sunday night football. So I hope what we focus on from this game more is, the bright young future for Green Bay, as well as, again, a Kansas City Chief teams that has found I think, top 5 maybe running back to add to their arsenal of weapons.
Absolutely. And, your points about the officiating, I completely agree with all of them. I would also add, we always say the refs are human and that it's just an unfortunate part, but I think it's a necessary one. I don't think anyone wants to see a game officiated by robots. And the last thing I would add there is just the makeup call. I 100% agree with that. I think that's a real thing. I don't know if I agree with either of those calls, but it's a real thing, right? Again, because they are humans. And I also think there's an element of just, especially on these Sunday night football games where it's a standalone game, everyone has it on because it's national TV. I think we over scrutinize the refereeing in some of these games.
Yeah.
There's bad calls in all of the games all day. Again, it just falls on these refs are humans. They're going to miss things. Everything's happening in such split time. And it is an unfortunate part of the game that is going to be a large part of the conversation. But I'm with you. I'd really like to touch on just the Chiefs and the Packers going in and out of this game. On the Packers side of it, LaFleur is 15-0, now 16-0 in December. And to me, that speaks to the Packers and their ability to peak at the right time. It's just an incredible performance by them all around. The Chiefs defense has been stout all year, really looking like a top 5 one across the league. And to me, I think questions are starting to creep in on whether or not they're showing a regression. I know they've had a couple injuries here and there, but really that defense did not play overwhelmingly great today. The Packers were able to get downs at really key times in the game. And just, they were able to control clock, keep possession away from Mahomes, and really just a great effort by the Packers. They've really got a lot of good momentum, and down the stretch, they've got a pretty easy schedule. After today, they're at Giants versus Tampa Bay, at Carolina, at Minnesota, and versus Chicago. So they could really run the table here at the end and have a lot of good momentum going into the postseason.
And just, I completely agree with everything you said. They played the perfect game for beating the Chiefs. Again, a lot of the passes were a lot of underneath things. Again, just keep the clock moving, keep control. You want the ball against the Chiefs. The Colts in the regular season the last few years, where we beat them the last 2 times we played them, and that's just because they always go for that same strategy where it's a lot of short completions. You're not reinventing the wheel. You just have to play smart, clean football, and that's what the Packers did. In terms of the time of possession, they did end up only barely winning. They had 30 minutes. The Chiefs only had 29, but again, it wasn't that. It was the consistency. They scored on most of their drives. They were so efficient, and what again is so, to me, the Green Bay Packers are not playing for the Super Bowl this year. But what they do have is one of the most interesting roster building situations, I think, in the whole league. So many young, talented players, A.J. Dillon, Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson, Dontavian Wicks, Tucker Kraft, and Luke Musgrave are now they might be, getting more playtime as well. The both of them as sort of a unit. Jaden Reed. I mean, all of those guys are first or second year players. as well as Jordan Love being a first year as a full starter. It's very interesting to me how they're doing it. It's almost like the Magic, like we just talked about, where they're trying to just get all these good young pieces, win a few games, and then maybe you start to add the pieces. It's almost like an NBA style building of a team. It's very interesting. I really like it though. And again, I might not be the biggest LaFleur fan, but what I will say is, again, in this game, there was a lot of, I think, questionable decisions by him, but there's a lot of great ones. And now that they're finally letting Jordan Love rip, they've won 4 out of their last 5. They're in a division that's winnable. The Lions have not been playing A-plus football. I'm not saying they'll win the division, but again, I got to give LaFleur and Love credit mainly for this one, because this was a great game. Even with some of the, I wasn't huge on everything that LaFleur did in this game. They went away from the run early in the third, and it's one of the reasons the Chiefs were able to get back into the game. But in the end, they got back to it and knew exactly what they needed to do. And hats off to Jordan Love. That throw to Romeo Doubs on 4th and 2 is one of my favorite plays of the year. So that was an incredible play. I just wanted to highlight.
Most definitely. And I think I'm a little bit higher on the floor than you might be, but I really want to give him credit for sticking with the young roster. And, we talked a lot, at the beginning of the season with the deep shots that were letting Jordan Love take down the field, and his completion percentage was horrible. And his percentage of uncatchable passes was up in the 30s at one point in the season. Really, really just showing flashes of being a young player and not having a lot of experience. It was interesting to see how much trust the coaching staff was willing to put in him. I think at this point in the season, it's starting to pay off. They weren't the most aggressive today on the offensive side of the ball, but I think they made plays at the right time because of that confidence, and they really trusted, Love to get it on 3rd and long at different times in the game. So that was really cool to see. Switching over to the Chiefs side of the ball real quickly here, I think, I've been an ardent Chiefs defender over the last year or two, and I've been really high on their ability to win, and a lot has been made about their receiving core and just their receivers' inability to catch the ball and ability to run good routes, create separation. To me, I think a lot of the blame has to fall on the offensive trio of Reed, Kelsey, and Mahomes for a number of reasons. Mahomes has not been great down the stretch. He took a lot of red zone sacks today. It's very uncharacteristic for him. And over the last couple of weeks, he's also thrown a lot of late game interceptions. Something that we're not accustomed to seeing out of him, but it's starting to come up more frequently. We saw Kelsey have that late game fumble against the Eagles, and even Andy Reid, for the offensive genius and mastermind that he is, I think his offensive play calling has been a little suspect down the stretch of these games. The clock management has been a little off. I think we hold the 3 of them to a gold standard because they've proven that they can do it at the top, and they've done it a number of times. That's why they've all got 2 Super Bowl rings over the last couple of years. But at the same time, Kelsey himself is showing signs of age, not necessarily in the production numbers, but when he's needed to make plays. We saw it down the stretch of the game today. He wasn't Mahomes' go-to middle of the field guy. Wasn't really able to make any big impact plays. And I think, again, finally, I would add just on the Reed side of things, I talked a lot about the receiver core and, giving themselves so many options, needing to give playing time to some of the more deserving receivers or just some of the receivers that were showing better production. I think they have started to go that way with a guy in Rashee Rice. He's continued to play really well and had a lot more targets today. The usage percentage has definitely gone up for him, but they're still, they haven't established a number 2 at all. MVS has struggled with the deep ball. Obviously, we saw it again today, PI or not. He also had a drop earlier in the drive. Justin Watson hasn't been the guy they expected. Sky Moore, Kadarius Toney. I just think the Chiefs offense continues to not answer the questions that I was kind of pushing away. And now that we're sitting at, going into basically the last quarter of the season, the alarms are starting to sound, most definitely.
No, and I agree. And again, Andy Reid is I think my favorite coach of all time. I was thinking about that today while watching the game, just because he really it's such a love for the game, and his offense is always so pure and everything. I mean, they're winning playoff games with Chad Henne. He had Mike Vick and brought his career back from the dust. Alex Smith had an MVP caliber season. And now look what he's done with Mahomes. I mean, they're just one of the most explosive offenses in football. But I agree where I think right now we're seeing him struggle, and I think it's kind of his fault, which is crazy to say. I will say, finally just committed to running the ball today, and I think that was great. Isaiah Pacheco, like I said, he's creeping into my top.
He's been a monster.
Yeah, he's creeping into my top tier ranking for running backs. Just the way he runs and the way he always seems to make the right play. I really appreciate what he does. And again, like we criticized earlier, they're using Rashee Rice more, and they're trying to get more of a rotation, but MVS continues to see quality playing time, and a lack of production has increased. So I'm not saying you give up on him, but again, a guy like Sky Moore, you were really high on. I think either just give him the ball in his hands a little more. 2 targets all game for a guy that you drafted fairly high, and again, they had a lot of faith in. And with Travis Kelce, I just think with him, he is, in my opinion, the greatest tight end of all time. I'll die on that hill, and I'm not even a Chiefs fan. I don't like them, if anything. I'm very critical of them, if anything. But Travis Kelce is getting up there in age. He's in his mid 30s now, and very few tight ends have been able to produce, after a certain point, because you're playing every play as a tight end. A receiver can really take plays off sometimes, but as a tight end, you're on the end of the line. You're run blocking almost any time there's a run, and you're in the trenches with those guys. So your usage is so high. And late in that game, he was doing a lot of releases off the line as a blocker, just a little chip, and then releasing for short yardage on that game-winning drive. Like you said, they weren't having him in the middle where they used to focus him. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily age, but he just did look a little slower out there today. And, the OPI, where he usually used to just be so good at using his body to get off the block, having to use his arms. I just think, again, we might see these guys are human after all. He has to dip out. And again, I just want to throw out there, all of the Taylor Swift stuff in so stupid to me. That is not the reason. Mad Dog was going off on him for going to one of her concerts or something. That's absolutely absurd. He is still one of the greatest tight ends in the league. I mean, the dude has over 800 yards still. I mean, he's going to finish a top 3 tight end this year. So the talks of that stuff needs to go out. I just think what we need to give him the benefit of the doubt, though, he might be in the twilight of his career. As crazy as that is, as dominant as he's been, he's getting old. I mean, he's human. I just think it's so crazy to me. We don't need to make it more than anything about football with him. And he's talked about retiring recently in the media. He's been very public about that, as well as his brother. They're old. They have a successful podcast. They just had a #1 single. I mean, if I'm being honest, if I was Travis Kelce, what are you playing for anymore at this point? You're, in my opinion, the greatest tight end of all time. You have multiple Super Bowl rings. You have a very successful podcast. You could do whatever you wanted to and people would watch. And again, I'm not saying that he's getting complacent. I'm just saying I think he's getting old.
Yeah, and lastly, I just would reiterate, the standard that we hold Mahomes, Kelce, and Reed to is an earned one, right? And sometimes that standard can be a little unreasonable to ask of players at certain stages in their career, particularly, I would say, in the defense of Kelce. Gronk was very much Kelce's contemporary, just a couple years earlier into the league, and Gronk retired twice in the time that we still consider Kelce to be at the peak of his powers. And so, again, these criticisms that we have of that trio, by no means are we saying they're not at the top of the NFL still. In many ways, they still are, but it is just, we are seeing that human element of they're coming down kind of to the, I wouldn't say to the average, but coming down to the norm of the elite, right? Like, we saw them at these super high mountains, and right now we're just seeing them play kind of like just an above average tight end and above average quarterback. And just with the rest of the roster around them right now, particularly on the offensive side of the ball, just don't know if it's enough for them to be able to steamroll into the postseason as they have in years prior. I think with that, then we'll move over to our next matchup, that being the Indianapolis Colts visiting the Tennessee Titans today. The Colts win this thriller 31-28 in OT, and a lot to talk about on both sides of the ball here. Where do you want to start with this one?
So I just wanted to highlight first, I'm wearing my Gardner Minshew shirt. I got this at a local store in Indy because, again, I don't think he's anything crazy. I think he's been, if anything, kind of disappointing, as crazy as that is to say for a guy who just won 4 games. But what this team has shown to me, this Colts team, is resilience. I was texting one of my friends today, Noah, and I told him we're just kind of like the crappy Eagles, where we're finding ways to win, but we aren't an elite team by any stretch of the term. Our starting running back was there. Our starting quarterback was out today. One of our best interior linemen was out, one of the best run stuffers in the league against the Derrick Henry-led Titans. I mean, the Colts had every excuse. Our starting corner's out, but they don't make them. You don't hear people making those excuses. The Colts have an absurd 5-1 away record this year. This team just fights, and I think that's what Shane Steichen does. So more than anything, I just want to highlight that this team fights, and I think Michael Pittman is finally starting to establish himself as one of the elite receivers in the game as well. Absurdly good on short yardage. I was telling my friend today, I was like, I think he might be one of the best short yardage receivers in the league, which is maybe the weirdest title to give a receiver, but he really just excels. I mean, he always has 9 catches, but like never seems to eclipse 100 yards, but they're always important catches for first downs or to make first downs, go into second and manageable rather than second and long with an incompletion. So the Colts fight, and it isn't any indictment to the Titans. I just think they have so much going on in that team right now, and one of the worst O-lines in the league. So I just think they're playing for next year at this point, but very respectable game by them. And Will Levis looks like he could potentially be that guy for them. I think that's still the most interesting thing about that team right now.
Yeah, to start with the Colts, I really agree with you here. I think the addition of head coach Shane Steichen has just been fantastic for them. You just really see it in the fight, right? You're mentioning just that intangible element of how hard, are you going to go every week, how much you want to fight for it. And you were really seeing the Colts just never give up. They overcame a lot of adversity today. And to your point about Gardner Minshew, again, I agree. I think he's been impressive, not overwhelming, right? He had the third and goal overthrow to Pierce in the back of the end zone. He had the fumble in the pocket. He had the 2-point conversion go the other way. But at the same time, he throws for 312 yards. He's got 2 touchdowns, and he had great plays down the stretch in OT. The dime for 55 yards was, a great play. And so, again, I think that combination, a little interesting of a dynamic there. Obviously, Minshew came over with Steichen from the Eagles. Obviously, had been the backup for them there, and just really cool to see that element, right? Because particularly for Minshew, he's a guy that came into the season not expecting to play a whole lot of football. And then obviously with the injury to Richardson, he's really risen to the occasion, and 4 straight is nothing to be ashamed about. I think at 3-4, a lot of people had penciled the Colts in as dead in the water, and now they're in the thick, honestly, with good playoff positioning, especially within that division. On the Titan side of things, I agree. The Will Levis experiment has been going pretty well for them. It is one of those things where it's a little hard to evaluate just given the offensive line struggles, but he's been playing pretty good. And there was one thing I wanted to hone in on, which was that sideline exchange he had with Hopkins coming off. He really got in the face of Hopkins. And to me, that was kind of he has the respect of this team. He's the young QB rookie that wasn't expected to play. And you've got this veteran wide receiver, while not necessarily one of the league's elites at this point in his career, definitely a just well-respected and prominent name in the receiver core across the league. And to see that exchange go on, and Hopkins himself said after the game, that's the dynamic we have. He's earned our respect. He's going to be our guy. I think that's really, really important to have in your young QB. And it's just really cool for a guy that's set in the draft. I think just thinking through his draft evaluation and just kind of the perspective people had on him going into the draft. I think the intangibles, right, are things that stuck out. And then obviously you love the physical profile, 6'3", 230 pounds. He's got a huge arm, and, he's got an ideal build that can just take hits, and somebody's sitting in the pocket and taking sacks. You don't feel that bad about it. So, I think the concerns are still there a little bit. He's a little spotty with his accuracy. He does try to, it does appear that he struggles with, reeling it in sometimes, not taking the check down, looking for the big play. But at the same time, I think, again, there's so much to like about it. And even though the Titans are now sitting at 4-8, I think they have a lot of positives moving forward.
Yeah, I think if I'm the Titans at this point, what they need to focus on more than anything to me is just, again, not screwing up the future more than anything. They have some bright young pieces. Tajay Spears looks to really be coming into his own as a backup. Derrick Henry most likely being gone in free agency next year. As well as, again, your best receivers, an aging DeAndre Hopkins, who's past his prime. Again, like you said, still, I think when he's playing at his best, DeAndre Hopkins is a top 10 receiver in this league, but we just haven't seen that consistency. And I think part of that is due to age. But if you're the Titans at this point, you need to be playing for the future. Getting you in the playoffs does absolutely nothing for you. And I know Jeffrey Simmons said last week, we're still fighting. I understand these guys are never going to try to lose, but winning does them absolutely no good. So I think today was a good loss for them, if anything. It showed that they have some fight in this young team, but more than anything, they also just understand that we need to get better. And, our receiver core isn't great. We have a lot of old players on this team that's young and needs to get young and really just build around a young core. Meanwhile, while the Colts look like, they've now established that young core. And once Anthony Richardson comes back, if he is able to bring them to the next level, they could be legitimate tenders seriously as little as next year. I had the Colts penned in at 4 wins this year. And I'm a Colts fan. So I just want, people to understand that this isn't my bias speaking through that I think, they could contend next year. It's just the fact that with a backup quarterback and a backup running back for most of the year, they currently sit at a spot where they control their own destiny. They play the Texans and Steelers late in this year, both teams which are tied at the record of 7-5. And if they win both of those games, they seriously could be sitting at the 4 seed with a backup quarterback. And again, like I said, a backup running back for most of the year. Just truly insane what Shane Steichen has done. And I think it's a shame that his name isn't more involved in the coach of the year conversation.
And quietly, that division is going to be a real fun one for years to come. I think Richardson has really shown some promising flashes, albeit the injuries. And, you've got Trevor Lawrence in the Jags, Richardson in the Colts, now Levis in the Titans, and CJ Stroud in the Texans. I think that's going to be a super fun AFC division for years to come. That being said, we're going to move forward to the NFC, and what many expected to be the game of the week, they have now somehow fallen to third in our A block rundown, that being the 49ers at the Eagles. And this one got away quickly from the Eagles after some struggles for the Niners at the gates. They took this one away running 42-19. And to me, all things we thought to be true before the game proved to be true to the game. The Niners were dominant once they were able to get out with a lead. I think the questions about them being down, I think those concerns are still going to be there because we didn't get to see that element. That being said, I think there are a number of takeaways we can have coming away with this game. Drake, where do you want to start with this one?
I just think my start for this is I just want to reiterate the fact that I think Christian McCaffrey, in my opinion, might be my MVP frontrunner still, because I mean, what the man is doing is just unreal. Night in and night out, he shows that he is one of the most electric athletes on the football field. And it's just so crazy to me because I didn't think, me and Wilson were kind of heavy on, don't know if that usage is sustainable, but what he's done so far this year is just truly incredible. The lead in scrimmage yards and touchdowns, or not, he doesn't lead the league in scrimmage yards, but to be top 3 in the league in scrimmage yards, as well as number 1 in overall touchdowns. And on a team that's a contender, and you have a young QB, who needs all the help he can get and is getting it, right? And, a lot of people are saying, oh, well, Purdy should be in the conversation. And to me, watching this game just showed me once again why I don't think Purdy belongs in that conversation. His number 1 receiver, Deebo Samuel, had 116 yards and 2 touchdowns. Deebo Samuel took 2 touchdowns for a combined 80 yards to the house on passes thrown under 5 yards from the line of scrimmage. So you can immediately put him back to 200 yards, being 80 of that is yak. And again, I don't want that to come across as Purdy hate. I just don't think people really understand how good the infrastructure around Brock Purdy is when they're talking about that. Because, they're picking out all these stats that he leads the league in. And it's like, again, I'm not discrediting what he's doing, but I'm just saying it's, he's not reinventing the wheel with what he's doing. I think if you put, again, a guy like Jalen Hurts, Mahomes, Josh Allen on a team like this, I just think it would be ugly what guys like that could do. And again, Purdy has physical limitations that those guys don't. And so when we're talking about that, I just think, again, Christian McCaffrey is unbelievable. He took over this game against one of my favorite run defenses in the league, just took over. I mean, he owned them. He showed them. He's like, I'm going to win this game. We're going to control the clock. We're going to do what Philly does, but better. I mean, my hat's off to them, and my hat's off to Shanahan as well of getting over himself and running the ball after a unbelievably stupid first quarter of not giving Christian McCaffrey the ball once. He forgot even who his best player is and was trying to outcoach himself, but even he couldn't contain how good Christian McCaffrey is at football.
And I don't think what you're saying at all on Brock Purdy can be viewed as hate. I really think it's just providing perspective, because I agree with you in direct alignment. I think you just look at the yak, right? What Debo, Ayuk, Kittle, C-Mac, what they're able to do after the catch is just truly what unlocks that offense. And Purdy does an excellent job. He's one of the elite game managers around the league, and it's so impressive given his youth and, just the limited exposure he had coming into the NFL. That being said, I think you can't be the MVP of the league if you're not even the best player on your team. And to me, he arguably could be the 4th or 5th most valuable thing in that offense. And again, I don't mean that to sound as an insult to Brock. He's playing well and he doesn't make mistakes, but it is more just a credit to those guys that we named. Kittle again continues his hot streak, 4 for 68 today. He's been averaging over 90 yards a game over the last 4. You mentioned Debo, and Ayuk quietly, when the Niners need a touchdown, he's open in the end zone for them. And Sirianni just penciled them today in as a tough team to tackle. I think that's just an excellent way to describe it. We know the struggles the Eagles secondary has had all year, and I think it showed up again today, particularly once the Niners went into their run game. It kind of opened up the passing game for Purdy, and things got away from the Eagles rather quickly. I'm glad to see that Hurts wasn't overly injured. Again, I don't necessarily know if this is a super big indictment on the Eagles necessarily. I still do think they're one of the elite teams in the NFC. I just think that once the Niners get out and running, they're really hard to stop. We've seen them do it to the Cowboys, the Jags, the Seahawks, and now the Eagles. And again, I just go back to the questions that I have about the Niners are particularly those centered around what are they going to do when they face a little more adversity, in the sense of when they're down, right? Mm-hmm. Shanahan, there's that stat that's been going around, entering the 4th by 3 or more points. He's 1-31. And you can call that, whether that's a chicken or an egg question. Some could say that he hasn't necessarily had a difference maker at quarterback. And we know that playing down with mediocre quarterback play can be a struggle at times. But again, I think that is just, those continue to be the questions. And a game like today doesn't necessarily give us the answers to those questions.
No, I agree. And I think, again, first to touch on the Eagles, to me, what I just think, while they are maybe on paper one of the most talented teams in the league, we also have to look at the human element, just like we do with Travis Kelce. James Bradbury's 30 years old. Darius Slay is 32 years old. Kevin Byard is 30 years old. The three best players in their secondary are all in their 30s in playing one of the hardest positions in the NFL. And I'm looking at those Debo plays, and again, I get that he's a freak of nature, but when you make it to the playoffs, you're facing the Cowboys or you're facing the Niners or you're facing these teams with just freaks of nature at playmaker, or the Seahawks with DK. I mean, you saw what he can do against a great team like the Cowboys, a great secondary as well. So to me, I just think the Eagles need to kind of figure out the run game for starters. DeAndre Swift has absolutely petered off and gone into, just being a below average back at best recently, and with still what I believe is one of the best O-lines in football. I think a lot of that's got to be on him, as well as, again, I don't think they made a big enough effort in the offseason to get a great true runner to put behind him. DeAndre Hopkins is very injury riddled, as well as very hit or miss. He's very home run or none. That's just kind of what he is. Don't get me wrong, when he's hot, he is one of the more elusive backs in the league. But when he's on a cold streak like this, they need someone to dig him out of this. And I just don't think Kenneth Gainwell and Boston Scott are the guys to do it. And then my last thing, just again, like you said, with the Shanahan 1-31 record, I was talking to this about my friend Noah as well, because he also likes the Niners. And again, we were just talking about it, and it's the adversity when you have not Mahomes, not Josh Allen, not Joe Burrow, right? One of those guys who makes the difference, and he never has. And Purdy, we just still have yet to figure out, is Purdy the future? We don't know yet. He's playing great, but again, Jimmy Garoppolo played fantastic for them, took them to a Super Bowl. So we just don't know yet with Purdy. So to me, I completely agree. That is my biggest question mark. When they face true adversity, when they're being played close to the line, will they be able to pull ahead?
Yeah, and so I want to throw you one final question before we move on to the final game of our A-block slate here, and that being, how do you rank the contenders in the NFC right now? I think, to me, it's a clear-cut Cowboys, Eagles, and Niners are the top three. How you rank those can be rather subjective, I would say. And personally, I think I would have to go with the Niners at the 1 right now, Eagles at the 2, Cowboys at the 3, and you could very easily, you say that I'm just saying that because of the matchups, but to me, I just think when the Niners have all of their Pro Bowlers and all their pieces, the moment they get clicking, it's just really impossible to stop them. That being said, I also think that one or more of those key cogs in the Niners offense is away. I think we can see a very quick downward spiral. I think we saw that in their 3-game losing streak. And through those 3, we saw that Purdy struggled with the ability to come back when down. Obviously, the one game he had the concussion. Another game, his rookie kicker missed the 41-yard field goal. But again, I do think we had an opportunity to see some of those questions get answered, and they were not necessarily answered in the best of ways for the Niners. That being said, I want to throw you the question. How would you rank those 3 in the NFC right now?
So I'm actually going to kind of throw a curveball here and say, I think the most dangerous team in the league right now is the Dallas Cowboys at home. They played their worst game of the season, and they still scored 41 points at home. That is an absurd figure. Now, again, here's the issue. They don't have home field locked up yet. Okay, so I get that that's not plausible.
And it makes next week's matchup so pivotal.
Exactly. I think if the Cowboys get home field advantage, I think there's a chance they make it to the Super Bowl. And I've never been a Cowboys guy, but Dak and this offense, they're just unreal at home. Their last 3 games at home, they've scored over 40 points. And again, I get that the Commanders and Giants are kind of slouches, but the Giants defense has turned it on the last few weeks. The Seahawks are a playoff team. And then you look at their other home games against the Rams, 43-20, against the Patriots, 38-3. The Jets, one of the best defenses in the league, the defense that beat Jalen Hurts with their best 2 corners out. They put up 30 on them at home. Their offense is just, I've never seen a team be so different at home. Like it's wild to me. So my best team in the NFC right now is the Cowboys at home, but ranking the 3 you specifically gave me, I do think you just have to give the Niners edge right now, kind of out of recency bias, unfortunately. Just because, again, that's the nature of the game right now. They just beat the best team in the NFC in their territory. So I think you have to give it to them. And then I still put the Eagles at number 2. And then kind of, like I said, I don't think the Cowboys are my favorite to win the NFC, but if they can steal that game against the Eagles, I think it is a bad scenario for the NFL if the Cowboys can steal home field advantage.
Yeah, that NFC contender conversation is going to be super, super fun to watch unfold over the next couple of weeks. So, with that, we'll move over to our final game and we'll go over this one rather quickly. But we had the Falcons visiting the New York Jets, a super low scoring game here, 13-8. Falcons walk away with the win. I think the game itself wasn't necessarily overwhelmingly interesting for any reason or another, but I do think the dialogue around both of these teams, we can have a quick conversation about just some of the interesting points around either franchise.
Yeah, and again, to me, what stuck out this game just once again was the absurdity that is the New York Jets defense and the mediocrity that is their offense. And similarly, the Atlanta Falcons have one of the most talented core of young talent in the league, similar to the Packers. But what Arthur Smith doesn't do, which LaFleur has, again, very varied results in doing, is getting the ball to his playmakers. They are finally now starting to commit to really hammering Bijan, but it's just Drake London should never have one catch in a game like this, in a game that's this close. I mean, he's just made some of the most crazy catches this year. Kyle Pitts, again, he only has 4 catches. You drafted him the highest of any tight end, and you just aren't using him. It's, to me, this game was just once again what we've said about these teams all year. Falcons don't give their playmakers enough opportunities with the ball, and the Jets offense is just so bad it's bogging down what is one of the most talented defenses I've seen in the last 5 years.
Yeah, that's a perfect summary for me. And the Jets' decision to go away from Zach Wilson and kind of pivot to Tim Boyle and Trevor Siemian, obviously mixed results here. The two combined for 214 yards and an interception. Nothing overwhelming. Nothing I don't think Zach Wilson couldn't necessarily do, but I understand why they felt that offense had to make a change at that position. On the Falcons side of things, they're leading that division at 6-6. Obviously, they've got the Saints and the Buccaneers on their heels at 5-7. But I think the NFC South, even though it's not necessarily a competitive division, it is just on the low key side, interesting to see who comes out of that division. And, we'll see who either Dallas or Philadelphia, I guess, gets the opportunity to run over
Yeah.
in the wild card round of the playoffs.
Yeah.
I just wanted to quickly touch on the Rodgers situation before he cut out of our A block here. And, I think the dialogue that's happened over the last week or so about whether or not he's coming back to play, to me, has been more of a media stunt for Rodgers. I don't think the intention was for him to ever to play. I don't doubt that he's gone harder than anyone has ever gone at their Achilles recovery before, and I give him credit. I think it's, you raise the spirits around the team, and it's I understand like trying to break barriers. At the same time, I think part of this is Rodgers' push just against modern science and just wanting to rewrite the book on how we view science and medicine as a whole. And I think reports came out today, if they're not going to be competitive going down the stretch, he's not going to play. And, now sitting at 4-8, they're obviously not going to be competitive. And to me, I don't think it was ever going to play. I think it was just more the conversation and making the headline. But curious to hear your thoughts on that.
See, I disagree with that just from the standpoint of him practicing is insane in that timeline. I think if they had 6 wins right now, I do think he'd be playing just out of principle, because this defense is basically winning games on its own. And now where the O-line has issues, I think that's what, to me, if they were a 5-win team, I don't think they would have played him. But I think if they were 500 right now, I think they'd roll the dice on that, December date, just because, again, he is the best thrower of the ball in NFL history, in my opinion. So what he brings to a team is just, you cannot describe. But again, I do think it was a little publicity, and I think them still bringing it up now through this week is publicity. But again, I don't think we should write off one of the most insane recoveries from a major injury we've seen in modern sports.
Absolutely.
And with that, our A block will come to a close. In our B block, we will be talking a little bit about the NFL receivers and just kind of looking at what PFF had to say about them.
Welcome back into the B-Sides of Sports. This is our B-Block segment today, and Drake and I wanted to go over PFF's recent article ranking the NFL's top 10 most valuable wide receivers thus far in the 2023 season. So this is a list generated by PFF, Pro Football Focus, going over the top 10 receivers ranked off of their wins above replacement. So quickly just going through this top 10 here, we have Tyreek Hill, AJ Brown, CeeDee Lamb, DJ Moore, Brendan Ayuk, Keenan Allen, Jamar Chase, Stephon Diggs, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Chris Olave rounds out the top 10 here. So obviously a lot of notable names missing here: Justin Jefferson, Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp, to name a few. And that can be for various reasons. Obviously, wins above replacement is not necessarily a catch-all metric, but it is PFF's goal to kind of capture the value that these receivers are offering to their team. So Drake, just what are your thoughts on those top 10 in the rankings? You think, what are some of the notable snubs, and what do you think is some of the reasoning behind that?
So I think just what sticks out most to me, again, is Tyreek Hill being number one. Just kind of, I don't know, I'll be honest, because of his off the field sort of issues that he's had, I've never been the biggest fan. But that being said, in the 3 losses this year, he has under 100 yards. One in a game he talked about how he was going to dominate, being the Chiefs game, only had 60 yards. As well as a fumble in what was one of their biggest games of the year at that point, because that, for seeding purposes, that's a huge game. And then they go into Philadelphia again, another huge game, under 100 yards, only had 88 yards. And then you look at the Buffalo game, a blowout, and he had 58 yards. So to me, Tyreek Hill kind of cherry picks. Bad teams play him in single high, good teams don't, and he abuses that. Look at the Washington game today. Both of his long touchdowns were in single high coverage for whatever reason they think guarding the fastest player in football is in single high. But he's just kind of a bad team abuse merchant, if anything. Like looking at all of his games of over 140 yards, they were all under teams with losing records. As well as all in games where they won by 2 or more scores, except the Chargers game week 1. So looking at numbers like that, to me, I'm just, again, I've never been the biggest fan. I think a lot of his game relies on his speed. He's a okay route runner and he consistently gets better. But to me, his value is in his explosive playmaking ability and not his true receiver abilities. Like if I was going to build around a true receiver in the NFL, CeeDee Lamb has really impressed me this year. What he has done, Keenan Allen, that's another guy who I think is very impressive. Amon-Ra was on that list, thankfully. I think he's developing into what is one of the best young talents in the league. So to me, why I understand Tyreek Hill more than as a spot on this list, I'm way more inclined to like some of those guys just out of principle of, the showing up in big games while as Tyreek Hill just really hasn't this year, which is surprising because I feel like he used to be kind of known for that in Kansas City, but it's kind of been the inverse this year as well, as though that's kind of been the theme with the Dolphins team. So I'm not putting all the blame on him there, but just saying I'm very high on CeeDee this year. Wasn't big on him when he got drafted. I think what he's doing is he's helping Dak really finally go into where we all thought he should have been for so long. After that ankle injury, he was off to a meteoric start, but he just kind of slowed down. But CeeDee has finally, I think, brought him back to what I think his true potential is. So hats off to him, as well as Amon-Ra, who's helping Jared Goff do very similar.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point that you bring up with Tyreek Hill. And I think particularly considering entering the postseason, I think this will be a super interesting postseason to kind of consider how some of the top tier talent at the receiver position performs in the postseason. I think in a league where at the quarterback position, we've obviously had the exit of Brady, and this year Rodgers likely will not be in the postseason. And then we've got guys like Burrow, who's now injured for the season, and Allen is obviously not having a more above average season for him. Really, the Bills are going to be struggling to find a spot in the postseason too. I think we're going to get a lot of these other guys having an opportunity in the postseason to kind of establish themselves as, how much can they just alone at the wide receiver position impact the game. And to me, it's very interesting. The wide receiver position is dependent on so many factors, right? At the same time, they can impact the game in so many ways on their own. The one that I wanted to kind of go to was Justin Jefferson. And so I understand why he's not on the list. Obviously, he's been injured for a large part of the season. Kirk Cousins is not out for the season. So obviously I understand why he's not ranked in the top 10. But I wanted to kind of consider, the Vikings were really struggling out the gate with Jefferson, right? I think they were 1-3 to start the season, and then he goes out and they reel off a couple wins in a row. And again, I don't want to make it sound like I'm attributing the Viking success to Jefferson not being out there on the field, but I do think there is an element of, as the number one receiver on the team, what is the fit with the rest of the roster? How much attention are they demanding from the defense? What is the type of coverage they're going to see? What are the routes they're running? And, last week you had a really great point about the Chargers and their kind of 3 giants in their starting receiver core. And, so you see a lot of these other rosters have different combinations of the talent, the size they want to put at that receiver position. Again, I don't necessarily know if I have an end conclusion on what I think the perfect fit is, but I just think it's interesting to consider that A, quarterback receiver dynamic, as well as just B, the receiver's chemistry with the rest of the roster. This is a year where Garrett Wilson is, I think, to me, clearly a number one receiver option. But at the same time, that Jets offense is really struggling, particularly because of the quarterback position. But I also think across the board, I think the receivers gelling, right? Sometimes watching that Jets offense, it doesn't seem like the offense is on the same page, from the line to how the run game is getting established and how the receivers are lining up. And so, yeah, curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I think, again, I understand where you're coming from. in saying that, it just kind of points to that. But if you look at the Vikings rushing game, going from Dalvin Cook to Alexander Madison, they had 8 lost fumbles through the first 4 weeks when they were off to this horrendous start. So to me, it was less of Justin Jefferson, and Jordan Addison started out really slow. And I will say that might be a little bit of Justin Jefferson's fault because he's so good. You just want to throw the ball to him every play. So I get that is where I'll kind of give you credit, because I do think they were underutilizing TJ and Jordan, and I think him getting injured will help them there. But I think to attribute the wins and losses to that isn't great, just because, again, like I said, they're historically one of the worst teams at rushing the football right now, and Alexander Madison is just playing pretty terrible. Tyson Chandler's come in recently and started playing a whole lot better for him. But so to me, I just think my main takeaway with that is less of, I don't think that's more Jefferson's fault, but more of, again, Kevin O'Connell, I think maybe was just like, he's our playmaker. There's that balance, right? You want the ball in your best player's hand every play if you can do it. But at a certain point, again, so much attention is going to be to them. That's when you take your shots to other guys. You give your other guys a chance, right? That's why reverses in the NFL usually work so well. You have your best guy running one way and then your fastest guy running the other. It kind of throws them off. Well, they want to naturally go with the best guy, but they're going to go. It's why play action works. If we're running the ball really well 8 times in a row, well, we're going to have to give a little more attention to the running back. We're going to only play a single high safety. So again, it's getting teams to do that. And I just think they didn't have the balance right. So I wouldn't attribute that to Jefferson, but more of Kevin O'Connell. And again, I don't think he necessarily realized how good Jordan Addison was at first. And again, TJ Hockenson, another fantastic talent. Again, I just think he was kind of more undervaluing them than overvaluing Justin Jefferson.
Yeah, and balance is the right word. I definitely don't want to make it sound like I was attributing the losses to Jefferson, right? He can only be a positive impact for them when he's out there. I think the Rams are another interesting, compelling case to consider when thinking about just the dynamic amongst receivers, right? Puka Nacua came blasting onto the scene this year, really shattering records for rookie receivers through his first couple games in the league. And a lot of that was just the injury to Cooper Kupp, right? Not having Kupp out there. Stafford was targeting Nacua at a super high rate for a rookie receiver. And, reintegrating Cooper Kupp into that offense came with its struggles. The Rams really struggled offensively. They've obviously had a really poor O-line throughout the year. And Stafford has been battling through some lingering injuries of his own. But I think today, they're able to get things clicking a lot better, and against a really good defense. And I just think it's interesting to kind of just consider, the receiver dependent is just so dependent on so many factors. And when it clicks, it's a beautiful thing. But I think the struggles at times can get really magnified when not everyone's on the same page.
No, I agree. And I think that's kind of a great place to leave that conversation. And so with that, we will head into our C block, where we will be switching gears into the NBA and talk about the recent success of the NBA G League. Welcome back into the B-Sides of Sports. And for our last segment here today, we're going to talk about something that I've really come to appreciate in recent years, and that is the NBA G League. What once was kind of trying to be pigeonholed into what the MLB minor league farms were, had varying levels of success, went through a lot of phases, gone through like 30 names. I don't even know them all, but since I've been watching basketball, it seems like they rebranded 19 times. But regardless of that, really has become I think a golden goose for the NBA and increasing the quality of basketball we're getting. So Wilson, where do you just kind of want to start this quick conversation on what the G League has become?
Yeah, you did a good job giving credit to what the NBA G League has really developed into. And while I do believe that the NFL continues to be the number one American sport, I think basketball in the NBA has truly established itself as the clear number 2. And I think, again, the G League is one of those factors that it just shows how on top of things the NBA league office is in terms of just having good perspective on what their sport is and what their sport needs. Interestingly, the Phoenix Suns are now the only team without a G League affiliate. Portland just added one this year, so 29 of the 30 NBA franchises have an affiliate G League team, and I think that's really, really important to note. I will say quickly on the Suns, it's interesting to me that they don't. Matt Ishbia has been a super aggressive owner. I'm kind of interested.
Yeah.
As to why they don't have an affiliate. It's kind of odd to me.
That.
But again, I
didn't know that. And I'm surprised because, like you said, his whole, like cable thing he rolled out where anyone in Phoenix can watch the games. Like he's done a lot of cool. That's very surprising to me. He's been
so ahead of the curve. It's puzzling to see that they don't have one. But yeah, to return to the G League here, just from the player development, the two-way contracts, there are just so many benefits that the G League offers. And I think having specific affiliate teams, right? A couple years ago, it wasn't like that. The Santa Cruz Warriors were not necessarily associated with the Golden State Warriors, but now they are. And I think it's shown to have a lot of benefits in a lot of different ways. I think the first is just the kind of dichotomy. There's two sides here with the young players, right, who won't get a lot of playing time in the NBA, can get true NBA like feel in the NBA G League. And on the opposite side of the spectrum, we have veteran players who are hoping to stick around, maybe getting picked up off of waivers after the trade deadline passes, signing for the vet minimum. It's giving those guys opportunities to stay in basketball shape. Importantly, a lot of players talk about how running open gyms is not the same as getting real NBA like game time. And the G League has really been able to replicate that. And I think it's been super important to just we've seen the emergence of these two-way players, right? It's akin to a practice squad, but these guys are able to get called up from the G League. They're ready to contribute immediately. There's no, incubation time for them to get kind of acclimated to the team roster and the chemistry and the climate. They already know what it's like being a part of those franchises. And so, again, I just can't get enough credit to the NBA and how well they've kind of developed this G League into truly a feeder for talent into the NBA level teams.
Yeah, and something I just want to touch on is, again, I think the NBA now seeing value. We've seen some guys like Scoot and Jalen Green opt to go in there instead of college, which I think is a nice alternative. Lets them get a little more feel for the professional side of the game. College basketball is very different from the pro game, and even down to the officiating. So I think it's very interesting to see guys do that, and I'm happy for them. I think it's great that they have that opportunity. And just so one thing I wanted to bring up is, I think what Wilson said about the recent success has really been so pivotal. The G League's been around for a very long time. The first ever call up happened in 2001, and it was Danny Green, which is, again, great NBA player. And I think, again, just to list off, just to give some stats here, and some context to what Wilson says, Danny Green is one of the more notable ones, as well as Hassan Whiteside was another early contributor. Robert Covington, one of my favorite role players in the league, also came from there in 2015. Yogi Ferrell, obviously the sensation for the Mavericks that one season, and Andre Ingram, the feel-good story of the year a few years ago, the tenured veteran, playing that game in the NBA and having just an awesome game. And as well as that, as these notable players been there for a while. I just want to bring up how last year they saw 164 call-ups, which was more than the last 4 years combined. And this year they're on pace for just a touch under that. So I think we really are seeing now the NBA teams themselves being like, holy cow, like this is an asset and we need to be taking advantage of it. Just like the practice squad, just like the farms in the MLB. They've really, again, the NBA just always being ahead of the curve. I think the G League is just another example of that. And them finally getting a little more serious about it has really helped them just turn it into what it should have been and now what it is, and truly just being one of, I think, their best assets at producing high quality basketball.
Most definitely. And to provide an additional layer of context on the 164 players, with 30 NBA franchises, that's on average more than 5 players a team getting called up into the league. That's insane for rosters who, it's a hard 15 with the two-way contracts. You could really call it 17, but that's, nearly 30-40% of an NBA roster is getting called up. And again, these guys aren't necessarily playing starter level minutes, but they are contributing to the team, particularly across the course of an 82 game season where we're seeing a lot of players get injured. These two-way contracts and the ability to call up players become super, super important to regular season success. And we know how important regular season success is in getting teams to good playoff positioning, etc. The last thing I wanted to touch on is just the G League Ignite. And you mentioned this with Scoot Henderson, but the G League Ignite is a G League affiliate team that came about a couple years ago, gave players the opportunity, given the one and done rule that is in place, to not necessarily go to college basketball, but get, real exposure. And, a couple years ago when NIL wasn't around, it gave players an opportunity to sign for pretty big contracts, right? Not in the millions, but hundreds of thousands. Makes a large impact to a lot of these players, particularly those that are coming from, less privileged opportunities. And with that, since its inception, it's only been a couple years now, 10 players have been drafted out of the G League Ignite. And again, it's just another small success story within the NBA G League. The NBA just continues to make waves with their player development. And I think it's increasing the overall level of play that we're getting to see night in and night out. I don't know how you feel about this, Drake, but to me, the games this year have been ultra competitive. The in-season tournament's a part of that. But I also think just encouraging the veteran players to play night in and night out, as well as because of that, younger players are getting more opportunity on some nights where teams are opting to rest their veterans on a less than heavy workload. And again, I just think all of it's combining for a really good year of NBA basketball thus far. We've been having a fantastic NFL season, but I find myself still turning NBA games on the daily because I just want to see what's going around going on around the league. And again, competitive games, intriguing storylines. So Just again, I think we've been giving the NBA a lot of credit and a lot of flowers, but I think they deserve it.
Yeah.
And it's just been a super fun season to cover thus far.
No, I agree. And again, that's just kind of my last point on it as well, is just, it's very important to cast a wide net, because it's always so crazy to me. You look at old sports, and I always just wonder how many, like Hall of Famers were missed due to lack of exposure.
Yeah.
And things like the G League just are one more opportunity for guys to be seen. Like you said, 4 guys were drafted out of the college, and that's Scoot Henderson, Jalen Green, and Kuminga are probably 3 of my favorites. I also really like Jaden Hardy for the Mavericks. That's a young player I really like, and he was picked in the 2nd round too, which is pretty crazy, So again, didn't have maybe necessarily the stats and the start he wanted, but I mean, I think he's averaging 8 a game for them right now, which is, again, really solid. And for guys who might have taken a few years to get in the league, they're getting more opportunities earlier. So I think I agree. I think it's leading to higher quality basketball, and I think that's why teams are using it more. Like I said, the absurd jump from 41 call-ups in 2020 to 164, that doesn't happen on accident. If that was just a fad, we would see that, and next year it would peter off. But like I said, we were on pace for maybe more than last year. So I completely agree. And I love it. It's also, again, I just, we get some great stories out of it. And like I said, Danny Green helped my Raptors win a championship. Robert Covington's one of my favorite role players in the league. Jalen Green's a really fun young player I like to see. And without the G League, we might have never gotten to see these guys. So, I mean, I'm a big fan. I was the one who initially even brought up to talk about this topic, just because I knew you were a little more knowledgeable on the subject than I was. And as well as just, I knew you were also fond of it. So I love it. I think it's fantastic. And I'm so glad it is a thing. And yeah, it's really cool.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to end off this week's podcast. We thank you guys for sticking around. This was a long one, just a lot of things to cover between the NFL and the NBA, but Drake and I are super excited for the stretch run of the end of NFL season here. Obviously, we're heading into the holidays, so we hope everyone's taking care, staying safe. Again, we always appreciate the support. Please feel free to leave a like, share, subscribe, comment, and we'll see you again here soon.